New Chicago Bears defensive coordinator Dennis Allen is going to need some additional help on the defensive line, plus at least one new safety of the future. Unfortunately, the Chicago Bears are getting an up-close and personal look at some top options at both positions down here at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we go through some top defensive prospects in the NFL draft here at the Senior Bowl that should be good targets for Dennis Allen's defense. We'll start along the defensive line, where Allen certainly has a type of defensive ends he prefers, but there's some other guys here. There's one perfect fit for me as far as a Dennis Allen defensive end here, but there's some other guys that might not be the exact mold he looks for, but might just be good enough football players that he'll take them and he'll find a way to make it work in his defense. Then we'll go to the interior of the defensive line, where if the Bears want to add some more depth there, some more size to compete with Gervon Dexter and Zach Pickens and Andrew Billings to fill out that unit, they can find some big nose tackles that move well. They can find some undersized three techniques that are lightning quick into the backfield. A lot of guys to like on this defensive line. Then we'll go through some athletic linebackers if the Bears want to add some depth there, and then the safety position as well. A couple of guys who've been standing out as more physical safeties in this game, but we'll also go through some of the guys at these positions as well that maybe aren't the right fit or aren't making the most out of their opportunities down here at the Senior Bowl. Because I will again remind you that every year in the NFL draft, Ryan Poles, I'm going to have to get over that someday. Ryan Poles always takes at least a couple of NFL draft prospects who practiced and performed down at the Senior Bowl. The Bears staff always likes Senior Bowl players, and it's likely that the Bears are again going to draft a couple of Senior Bowl guys here. And there's some options, potentially first-round picks for them, certainly guys in the second and third round along the defensive line and farther back on the defense that should intrigue them. On the second day of Senior Bowl practices down here, the big winner up front was Marshall edge rusher Mike Green. If you haven't heard of him from being more of a small school guy, that's okay. He did lead the nation in sacks this year, though. I mean, this is not just some small school kid coming out of nowhere. He had 17 sacks at Marshall this year. Measured at 6'3", 251, answered some of the size questions about him, and he ran over the Oregon offensive tackle Josh Connery today, just absolutely bulldozed him and put him on the ground. But he's not just a strength guy, right? I mean, he's got a great ability to bend the edge and duck under blocks. He's got a decent variety of pass rush moves, can go some push-pull and then kind of have a counter off of that to get into the backfield. It's why he was so effective at Marshall, but you kind of wondered, okay, 17 sacks at Marshall, how are you going to do going up against Big Ten and SEC offensive linemen on the other side? And boy, he has looked the part. Not that he had a perfect day by any means. You've seen guys be able to stay in front of him and corral him okay at times, but he is a guy who has the big, flashy highlight reel plays where you're like, wow, that guy is a playmaker. You just want to make sure he's continuing to do that at a consistently high rate, and certainly everything he did at Marshall indicates that that's going to be the case for him moving forward into the NFL. He was the big winner overall, but the name in this year's defensive line class at the Senior Bowl that screams out as a perfect fit for Dennis Allen's Chicago Bears defense is Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. Dennis Allen's Saints teams always had bigger, stronger bodied defensive ends that sometimes looked a little bit more like defensive tackles. They wanted guys who were big, long, and strong, and that is Shamar Stewart for sure. 6'5", 281-pound defensive end. Not that different from DeMarcus Walker in terms of build, but he moves really well for a huge defensive end with great long arms, good speed, and he's a guy whose production at Texas A&M wasn't incredible, and it feels like he's still scratching the surface of what he's going to be able to do in terms of being able to finish at the quarterback and go from a physical freak who's disruptive to a dynamic playmaker that can be a bookend on your defense. he would be a guy I can see Dennis Allen falling in love with and feeling like he could be a great pairing on the opposite side of Montez Sweat, and that someone like DeMarcus Walker, if he's retained this offseason and not cut as a cap casualty, can develop and bring him along in a similar body type. The 10th overall pick might be a little bit early for Shamar Stewart as it stands right now, but we'll see how this process goes. Certainly, if the Bears were to trade down, he could be in that conversation. He to me clearly looks like a first-round pick. He was somebody who, at practice, when he's running through the bag drills, where they're kind of hitting the sort of the dummy-shaped bags, he hits the bags harder than everyone else. You hear it. You see the intensity. He runs the drill at just like a different level than every other player here. And that, to me, stands out as like, that's a dog that you want on your defensive line and a great fit for what Dennis Allen likes to do. Now, a couple other guys who stood out that don't quite fit the big-bodied mold, but it's not that every single defensive end the Saints ever had was 281 pounds. You don't have to be that for Dennis Allen to take you, but a couple of super athletic, bendy edge guys who didn't look overly frail either. Like, they're definitely smaller, but not tiny, thin. Donovan E. from Boston College, Ezuraku, I think, Donovan Ezuraku from Boston College, and then Baron Sorrell from Texas. Both guys are similar builds, like 6'2", 250 in that range, 6'3", 6'2", around 250 pounds. Both guys can absolutely turn a corner, bend the edge, and collapse at the quarterback. They run around offensive tackles with ease. There was one play in particular, I think it was the Texas kid, Sorrell, who just, almost untouched around the left tackle, straight to the quarterback, strip stack. It was beautiful. One of those highlight reel plays, like all day today. Those two guys look like next level athletes at the edge rusher position. Like guys who are just, he's clearly a little bit faster and a little bit more fluid than all the other guys doing this. I thought Sorrell from Texas has really violent hands that he was able to get some power from. The Boston College kid, Donovan, I thought he wasn't as impressive the first day, but got a lot better from day one to day two. It was a little bit more intense, a little bit more dialed in, and I thought the first day I was a little underwhelmed, but this day it was a lot more smooth and fluid than we had seen the first day. Those two created a lot of contrast for me with one other guy who's built similarly, but didn't look nearly as sharp or as physically impressive. Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss. A lot of difficult to pronounce names on the defensive line this year. Umanmielen from Ole Miss, Princely, 6'4", 260, and just notice, like, he came into this with a reputation of, like, he's kind of the speed guy. The other Ole Miss defensive end, Ivy's a bigger body guy that's also a good Dennis Allen scheme fit, I should say. Like, he's not nearly as athletic as Shamar Stewart, but big, strong, I think lower ceiling, higher floor type of prospect there. Jaden Ivey, I think it's Jaden Ivey from Ole Miss. It was the other defensive end opposite Princely, who was supposed to be the speed edge bender guy, and to me, like, compared to the Boston College kid, and then Baron Sorrell from Texas, Sorrell from Texas, Princely at Ole Miss is just not nearly as impressive of an athlete, and to me, like, when you have that direct contrast right next to him at practice, it is not a good sign for his draft stock to be somebody who could try and separate himself a little bit more from the pack here. Like, that to me, I don't like to harp too much on guys who didn't play particularly well, but he to me is kind of the one that stands out in contrast to some of those other guys. Now, on the interior of the defensive line, you have a nice variety of humongous, big, strong nose tackles who are surprisingly effective movers for their size, and also tiny, undersized, three-technique pass rushing tackles who are just lightning quick and really hard to get a hand on. So we'll go through some of the guys on the interior that could complement these Bears defensive tackles well next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. But now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention. As they work on your return, well, you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. The Bears drafted 2 defensive tackles just 2 years ago with Gervon Dexter and Zach Pickens. They've got Andrew Billings coming back off of his torn pec injury. Maybe on paper right away, defensive tackle doesn't jump out as this huge need, and yet it was a position that was problematic this season because Billings goes out. Dexter was in and out at times, but Dexter generally played well, but then Pickens was so underwhelming. You felt like you had Dexter and nothing else on the interior defensive line. They were rotating in Byron Cowart and Chris Williams, but they signed Jonathan Ford off of the Packers practice squad. They were trying to do whatever they could to get some quality defensive tackle play and had a lot of trouble finding it. If I'm the Bears, I'm absolutely drafting another defensive tackle. I don't know how long Andrew Billings is going to keep being here. I mean, he's playing great, and he's not that old, but he signed a 1-year deal and then signed a 2-year deal, and he's a guy that you can try and keep around, but eventually players like that don't always stick around for 5, 6, 7 years. Like you may have to eventually kind of replace him. We don't know whether Zach Pickens will still develop into something that you can be excited about on the defensive line. I'm certainly not here to say that he is a draft bust or anything just yet. Yes, it's been 2 underwhelming seasons, but the defensive tackle position generally takes a little while for players to be their best in the NFL. It's a slower transitioning position compared to a lot of other spots. Rarely, but with some exceptions, but rarely do you see a rookie defensive tackle come in and dominate. We talked about this a lot in the offseason on the podcast, but it takes most defensive tackles 2, 3, 4 seasons before you really see them become the fuller versions of themselves and go from an okay player to a great player. So not that Zach Pickens is for sure going to be a great player, but I just think it's way too early to write off Zach Pickens, just as I think Gervon Dexter is also going to keep getting better. But because it does generally take defensive tackles a little while longer to adapt to the NFL, I'd like to keep drafting them so that if down the line you need a defensive tackle to be better, like you're not drafting them and hoping they're really good right away as a rookie, right? Like you need to have the guy 2 or 3 years down. Like let's say 2 years from now, Zach Pickens' contract is up and you let him go, and all of a sudden you need another defensive tackle. Well, if you draft a guy that year, it's going to take him a little while to get good. But if you draft a guy now, then a couple years from now in his second or third season, he could be better. So then the Bears can make the appropriate decision at the time for how they want their defensive tackle depth to be. Plus, just at any given time, you can't have too many good defensive tackles. And there's a good class down here at the Senior Bowl that Ryan Poles and company, Poles and Ian Cunningham were down here in person today. They weren't on Tuesday, but they were on Wednesday for the second day of Senior Bowl practices. And we've gotten to see a couple of really big freak athletes that are nose tackles with plus ability, and we've got to see some smaller, really just speedy, disruptive guys. So like the player I've really fallen in love with this week is Jamari Caldwell from Oregon. The Oregon defense has had a lot of players I've liked down here. Guys I haven't spent a lot of time watching up to this point, but like, man, those shiny helmets, I don't know what it is, but it's easier to see them, and it's easier to see them when they're playing really well. I think it'd be easier to see them if they were struggling too, but Jamari Caldwell is 6'2", 342 pounds. And I was really surprised that he was 342 pounds when I looked to see what his measured weight was, because he moves fast. He does not move like a 342-pound man. He moves like a 290-pound man. You could tell he's big. Right? It's not that he's hiding it perfectly, but he is super quick off the snap. You would not expect, like if you just threw on the tape and didn't look at his measurables, you would not expect him to be 342 pounds. He hits hard, and he moves with a great speed. Like it's kind of like how, like Akeem Hicks, not that they're the same player at all, but like that Akeem Hicks was like 330 pounds and he did not move. It's like that type of movement ability where it's deceptive how fast he moves, and it's hard for guys to stay in front of him. He's quick off the snap. He's got good feet. He's got good, strong hands. Another guy who, when they're running the bag drill and the guys running through and hitting the bag and turning the corner, like you hear it. You're looking at something else and you hear boom, 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 and you kind of turn like, what is that? And it's like, oh, that's Jamari Caldwell going through the bag drill there. Like he's a nose tackle I am falling in love with in this draft class. I think he's going to be a really solid player with not only like the size to hold up in the running game, but some real pass rush upside there. The other big name is Deion Walker from Kentucky, who's 6'8", 360 pounds or whatever it is, just clearly the largest human being out on the field. To me, he runs a little bit hot and cold, But, if you want a big nose tackle to develop behind Andrew Billings and kind of have Dexter and Pickens trying to play both 3 technique and nose tackle and kind of alternate between the two and which position are you going to be, if you want to have more of a true 3 technique and then more of a true nose tackle, those guys are kind of the 2 standout big-bodied nose tackles. Whereas one of those guys who's kind of disappointed me this week is Yahya Black from Iowa. I mean, he's supposed to be this big power guy, 6'5", 337, hard man to move, but I just haven't seen him really be able to get under somebody's pads and disrupt them and move them backward. He's just been kind of underwhelming. He definitely feels a bit slower than some of these other bigger guys that are listed at similar weights here. And those guys move so impressive for their size that Yahya Black's probably more like an average athlete for a nose tackle, but it just looks worse by comparison. So I've just been a little bit underwhelmed by him. One guy who's been particularly disruptive that I didn't know much about coming into this game, Darius Alexander out of Toledo. A smaller school option here, but 6'3", 304, and he's just a guy who makes a mess. He's going to work across the face of the guard and gets over to the center, so both guys are trying to block him, and he kind of ends up getting him to the ground, and the running back has to go somewhere else because he just kind of blew things up. He hasn't been a guy who I've seen necessarily knife into the backfield and then make the play and finish it, but he just is consistently disruptive and causing trouble for opposing offensive lines, and he's somebody that I've really liked watching work on the interior. Not as more of a 3 technique at 6'3", 304, but someone who is quick for that size, but compared to some of the other smaller guys here, he's not tiny. He's got enough bulk to be able to hold up in the running game there as well, and just be someone who's really hard to move. Because the smaller guys you got here are Aeneas Peebles from Virginia Tech. He because he's so small, he gets Aaron Donald comparisons. He's 6 feet tall, 289 pounds. He's got kind of just a short frame and excuse me, generally it allows him to slip by blockers very easily. He is super quick off the snap. He's explosive out of his stance. A lot of offensive linemen down here have really struggled to just stay in front of him because he can get lower than they can. He can bend a little bit, and he's through before they're even out of their stance. And there were back-to-back plays where he's in the backfield meeting the running back after the handoff because he's just lightning quick there. Now, at 289 pounds and just barely 6 feet tall, you have questions about his ability to hold up against the run and be a physical player in the NFL. He's holding up okay here against future NFL players, but it's a real question mark, and it's why let's not compare every short defensive tackle to Aaron Donald, but still a guy who flashes that kind of exciting speed, like a Kalijah Cansey from a couple years ago out of Pittsburgh as well, who went to the Buccaneers, right? Didn't turn out to be Aaron Donald, and that's okay. He can still be a very good football player as well. I'll also mention Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, 6'3", 293, so a little bit bigger, but not a little bit longer, but not a lot heavier. First round caliber type player down here. I mean, I watched him split a double team where it was like a guard center thing where the center was kind of supposed to pass him off, but he kind of gets in between the two so that the guard kind of had to back off, and he they came to him to double team him. He pushed them backwards and then didn't move from that spot for a guy who's only 293 pounds. This is not a nose tackle type of prospect. He is strong. He is quick. He's got pass rush moves. You could see him win in a variety of ways. These Ole Miss guys are abundant down here, and they've been really finding a way to distinguish themselves in their own individual ways, and that's Walter Nolan to me is a guy who I'm pretty excited about for disruptive. Give me more disruptive interior pass rushers. The Bears and any team can't have too many of those things. So obviously defensive line needs to be a pretty big priority for the Bears in the draft and for agency this offseason for Dennis Allen. But they also have some real questions at the safety position as far as the future for Brisker, the short-term future for Kevin Byard as well. There's not really safeties drafted and developed behind them ready to take over. And, you always want to keep an eye on the linebacker position and just see if you want to bring in some more guys to bolster that back end. So we'll look at some of the back seven names here up the middle. We're not really going to talk much about corners. There's one guy I'll mention, but Bears aren't in the market for corners. But we'll look at some linebackers and safeties that are standing out that could be some nice fits for Dennis Allen next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I've got the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time, whether it's for concert tickets, to see comedians, theater shows, or to go to football games, whether it's the playoffs. We haven't really had a Bears playoff game to get tickets for, but if you want to see any of these other teams, or in the NBA, or the baseball playoffs, I mean, they've got all of the ticket buying needs solved for you. Because with Gametime, you get to see your view from the seat before you buy your ticket, so you know exactly what you're getting with your ticket purchase. And you can also turn on all-in pricing so that there are no surprise fees at checkout, and the price you see when you pick your ticket is the price you end up paying for your ticket. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Safety and much more linebacker don't jump out right away as like huge needs that the Bears absolutely have to address. I mean, right now, Kevin Byard is under contract for next season. Jaquan Brisker is under contract for next season. TJ Edwards is under contract. Tremaine Edmonds is under contract. Like, in theory, those positions are fine. You know, you got Elijah Hicks as a backup who's younger. You've got Noah Sewell as a backup who they drafted and are developing. Jack Sanborn, obviously, still a part of this team, too. Like, it's not like, oh my gosh, you got to make sure you get one of these guys early. But I also like the idea of being prepared for the long term. You know, TJ Edwards' contract, I think, is up after this year, or maybe it's one more year after this, but they're able to get out of it pretty quickly. Tremaine Edmonds' contract is something the Bears can get out of, I think, after this season. Kevin Byard could be a salary cap casualty this offseason if they don't want to pay him again this year. And then Jaquan Brisker is entering the last year of his rookie deal, has this consistent concussion issue from season to season. And you don't know if the Bears are going to want to pay him a big contract or if they'll be looking for a Jaquan Brisker replacement as soon as next offseason. And so if you draft guys at these positions now, then you don't have to play them as rookies. You can let them develop a little bit more, and then they can build into a starting role in the future when you actually need them to. That's how you sort of stay ahead in the team-building process instead of like trying to catch up and fill these holes on the fly. You fill them in advance so that in the future you've got the next guys waiting in the wings. And then if you have injuries, you certainly have better options of young guys that can step in and take over, even if it's a little bit sooner than you perhaps would have hoped for. Let's start with the safety position here, where to me it was a tough day for a lot of the safeties out here in Mobile. Sometimes they can be put in some tough positions where they're in a drill that is designed for the offense to have a little bit of an advantage, and so you can't hold every missed rep against them. But like, I thought the Oklahoma State safety Trey Rucker had a really rough day where he's just like a step slow and a tight end or a receiver comes up and does a move on him and blows by. Like, just couldn't keep up with him and was too flat-footed in a lot of those spots. And then Billy Bowman from Oklahoma is a really small 5'9", 198 type of, might end up being a slot guy, but his feet were not very good, and he got burned. He got run over by a tight end. One player who kind of just bulldozed through him on his route and knocked him to the ground. Like, those guys weren't great. But if you want like a physical fighter in coverage who's just a savvy player, doesn't get flagged for that physical coverage, by the way, a pretty good athlete, I think he can be a versatile option that can play deep and can play up in the box. Dan Jackson from Georgia. To me, like, he's just one of these Georgia Bulldog defensive players. It's like, this is a football player. This is a guy who likes to hit, who likes to be physical, doesn't like to lose, and is going to do whatever it takes, and has enough athletic tools to stay with anybody. But he's not going to be the fastest guy in the field, but like, he's just generally a smart, physical football player at the safety position. And if you need somebody to replace Jaquan Brisker in the near future, perhaps he could be a guy you could develop behind him. And one other name I'll throw in here at the safety spot is Hunter Wohler from the University of Wisconsin. 6'1", 217, built like a classic safety. And this guy, he another one of these, like, he's not going to be the fastest guy in the field, but he's certainly not slow. But he's got some decent speed. I don't mean to undersell Hunter Wohler's speed. He's fast, but not like out of this world. Oh my God, you got to see how fast this guy is. But he's got good speed. He's got good size. And he's just a solid player, like instinctually knows where to be, knows how to get his hands on footballs. Like, I don't know, the ball skills are not like anything special, but like breaks up passes, right? The interceptions, he had a few, but like knows how to get to the ball and disrupt passes over the middle field, deep downfield. Like, these are versatile football players who don't necessarily fit neatly into like, oh, he's got to be a deep free safety who roams the back end of the field but can't really do box stuff, or he's got to be a box safety who can't roam deep. Like, there's versatility that these guys can do a little bit of both. You can disguise with them and open things up more in coverage. But these are both guys that I think we'll see exactly how high the ceiling is for them. Are they ever going to be all pro 6 interception guys? Maybe not. But like guys who have really solid careers, who you feel like at the very least are going to be great special teams players and then can be a lot more than that, with good coaching and development in the NFL. Like those are two guys that I would be excited about as potential Chicago Bears. And the linebackers down here, we're looking a lot more like safeties today and all week. They've got a lot of these guys that are like 6 foot, 225 pounds in that kind of range. The real stud for me was Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon. Maybe it's Bassa, I'm not sure. 6'1", 226, like not a big linebacker at all, but like there was a play where he like he got beat at first and then caught up to the receiver and then broke up the pass, and we all thought it was a defensive back, and we had to like look and say, no, that was the linebacker, Bassa, who just tracked it down and put his hand up at the last possible second and broke up the pass. He's been like the play caller on defense down here, clearly a leader that this group, from day one, from moment one, looks to him. He's the alpha in the huddle there. Also has great instincts. Super, super fluid athlete in the feet, in the hips, moves really well. Now, 226, is he going to get pushed out in the running game sometimes? Maybe. I saw him work through blocks decently well, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell down here when everyone's trying to figure out what their job is and they're all playing together on a new team. And this is an environment that rewards those types of players more than other types of players. A really good example of this. There are two linebackers from Auburn down here. There's Eugene Asante, and then there's Jalen McLeod. And Eugene Asante is in this mold, right? 6 feet, 220 pounds, light, fast, fluid, smooth athlete. And then Jalen McLeod is 6'1", 247. He's got 25 pounds on his teammate. And he's the opposite, right? He looked slow out there and had trouble keeping up in coverage sometimes. But he's like big and strong and like tough and physical. And to me, like, it's a great contrast where McLeod looks worse because he's in space a lot down here because they're putting these guys in space. Asante looks great because he's so athletic. When they're putting him out in space, he can run really well and move well in space. But I don't know that reflects exactly how great of prospects they are, because to me, like, Asante looked like a player who is a great athlete, but more of an athlete than a football player at this point. Like, sometimes he's flat-footed, sometimes his feet are wrong, and he's got the physical tools to make up for it sometimes, but it's not refined, and he needs a lot of work, I think, to be a truly great player. But because he's got the physical tools, he's going to be a great player. I mean, with the right coaching. Whereas Jalen McLeod, he is a football player. He fights through blocks. He gets the ball carrier. He tries to punch it out. He's smart. He's savvy, but he's slow. He looks slow out in the open field, and it's like it makes him look bad here because of what they're asking him to do. I think he can be a 2-down linebacker for sure, a special teams player for sure, but slower like Jack Sanborn, but like slower, like Nick Kwiatkowski. It's like slower, where it's just he's a step slower than everybody else, and that to me is a big red flag in the modern NFL. Everyone wants faster, speedier linebackers, but maybe as things go more run heavy, he could fit better. I think if you want a bigger physical linebacker who has a little bit more speed to go with it, to me, it's Demetrius Knight from South Carolina. I think it's technically Demetrius Knight the second or junior from South Carolina. He's also 245 pounds, 6'1", but to me, he's a little bit more fluid, a lot less stiff of an athlete, and can get there sideline to sideline. And he's a tough guy. Like, there was a play where I don't remember who the running back was, but the running back like ran into him, and like he kind of just stood there and lowered the shoulder a little bit. That didn't lean into him, but just kind of braced himself. Running back ran into him and then fell down. Like, the running back fell down. The linebacker just stood there. The linebacker didn't hit him. The running back ran into him, and then the running back himself fell down, like bounced off of him and hit the ground. Like, he is tough, strong, physical. He's a butt kicker. He's also a football player, somebody who would be easy to root for, and a lot of coaches are going to love the way he plays the game. So to me, like, those are some of the standout safeties and linebackers. Talked about defensive tackles, defensive ends. Some guys who I think would be great fits for Dennis Allen. Some guys who I think don't stand out as perfect fits, but might still be players he likes, because just give me good football players and we'll make it work in our defense. We're actually going to get a lot more in-depth on Dennis Allen's defensive scheme on tomorrow's Locked On Bears podcast. We're going to be joined by Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints, who's covered Dennis Allen's defense for years. He's going to give us all the details on the types of players Dennis Allen likes, the rigidity of Dennis Allen's system, where it's kind of my way or the highway, and hate it or love it, like it or leave it, for better and for worse. This is what Dennis Allen's defense is going to be. It's going to be a lot more aggressive than Matt Eberflus's, very different from a coverage standpoint, but some of the personnel preferences are similar, which makes the transition easier for the Bears as well. So make sure you listen to that podcast tomorrow. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, hopefully every single day, because each day that you make Locked On Bears your first listen, then you get to start your day with another opportunity to bear down.